and we're going to try and do today is just give you an overview of the Imagine Boston draft document that's coming out, which is called Expanding Opportunities. And what I'd love to do today is just to make sure that you have every question that you want sort of clarified as to what it is that this document really puts out. So, I think we're in an incredible moment of opportunity, which is what this document seeks to capture. And what I want to do is share with you what that opportunity is and what we can do with it. So when the mayor came into office, part of what he did is he kicked off an enormous range of plans around thinking about who we can be as a city of Boston. So what you see here is a range of topical plans that we have, and all of these plans, yes?
You can be behind the microphone.
Oh, I can try. I think what we had difficulty with was the microphone, so we'll see how this works. Is that working well? Okay, excellent. Yeah, absolutely. So, wide range of topical plans, and all of these come together into our strategic citywide plan called Imagine Boston. The goal is that all of these components actually add up to be larger than the sum of their parts. So what are we going to show you today? I'm going to tell you about what the goals are for the type of city we want to be in 2030, the context that brought us to those goals, what are the actions, the initiatives that we're going to take to do those, and then how do those come together physically in actual geographical places, and what kind of changes do we need to make in order to properly implement them? So let's start here. Let's orient for a moment in our trends. First, Boston is growing. We grew, in terms of population, twice as fast as the nation between 2010 and 2014. Secondly, we have an incredibly productive economy. The Boston worker is almost a third more productive than the national worker. But not all of those gains have been fully captured in Boston. One thing that you may know well is that our household incomes are about the same as the nation, but our homes are about 2.5 times as expensive. And part of what that does is that can sometimes cause stress for our residents. Moreover, not all of the gains of our growth have been shared equally. So there's a stark wealth gap between white and people of color. So here you see the average household income, this is for Greater Boston, at around $250,000 versus $8 for blacks. The other thing that we know looking forward is that we are coping with a changing climate. And Boston is the fourth most exposed city nationally, and a lot of our economic centers are on the water. So what you see on the left-hand side are the types of changes that we're likely to see. On the right-hand side is a map of sea level rise into the future. The other thing that we know, if you look back about 5 years, 10 years, it was going to be hard to anticipate the types of technology changes, thank you, that we have. The way that we get around the city is changing, everything from hubway to ride share to car share. And the way that we use our city is changing. What will that mean going forward? We have to think about the things that we can't anticipate now and plan to be agile. So if you step back for a moment, part of what we're doing for Imagine Boston is trying to plan for the city that we're going to be, planning for the future rather than planning for where we are now. So let's just pause for a moment. What kind of future is it that we want? We took this question, we brought this to our residents. 12,000 residents told us the type of future that they want in 2030, and here is what we heard. We heard that we want to encourage affordability, reduce displacement, we want to improve quality of life. We also want to increase access to opportunity and drive inclusive economic growth. To prepare for climate change, and we also need to invest in our infrastructure, our open space, and our arts and culture. So if this is our starting point as to where we want to be, what are the concrete actions that we can take in order to make sure that we're able to live in that city in 14 years? So we're at this incredible moment of opportunity, which is actually one of the things that makes me really excited about this plan. Boston is growing, we're adding jobs, we're adding people. What I want you to notice is on the left-hand side of this screen, these numbers are trending up and they stay trending up. Our population, our jobs are growing. In order to capture the full benefits of that growth, we want to think about how to guide that growth. And from a pure land perspective, we know that we've got a limited land budget as to where where we can put that growth. So as we think about this, there are three broad types of places where we might think about this growth and investment occurring. On the left-hand side, you see existing neighborhoods, right? This is the type of triple-decker that I was born in. Second, we have our commercial cores, our tall areas. And third, we have this interesting category of neighborhood edges. Here you should think about your rail yards, our auto body shops, maybe our self-storage places, the missing teeth in our neighborhoods. And how we would grow in each of these areas would be different. So if you plot these areas across the city, this is sort of what it looks like, with the red being our commercial core, our job centers, our yellow being our neighborhood edges, our existing neighborhoods, and our purple being that sort of interstitial tissue, our neighborhood edges. How would you grow in these neighborhoods? So this is part of what Imagine Boston sets out. Set out a vision and guiding principles for the type of growth and enhancement that we would see in our neighborhoods. And here what I want you to imagine is an active Main Street where people are coming out to be with each other, where there's enough density to support the kind of really active sort of local economy that you have on your main streets, but very contextually sensitive that reaffirm each neighborhood distinct identity. Second, as we think about our mixed-use job centers. Our job centers are, in many ways, our consummate walkable neighborhoods. They're already very well accessed by transit, and they can really accommodate increases in residential use and increases as commercial cores as well. And so what you can imagine here is this growth in the sort of the space of times that we use our commercial core, not just on weekdays, but also on weekends, evenings, and mornings, as it becomes more of a residential hub. If you think about those two areas of growth, they don't on their own accommodate all the amount of growth that you can imagine that we will take. So then the question becomes, where else do we grow? And what we begin to look at are these edge areas. And here you see sort of a sprinkling of breadcrumbs, smaller areas that are edge areas, and then larger clusters of growth. And these are areas that you can imagine transformational change. And you've got on the left-hand side a description of some of the types of change that you might see building upon the assets and the proximity that these areas already have. Happy to talk about that more. So knowing that we have a lot of growth coming, and that if we're going to stick to our sort of vision of having contextually sensitive development, we're going to need to look to these larger clusters across the city. Many of the areas that we might grow are vulnerable to flooding. And so by growing in these areas, what we're doing is we're committing to making sure that we protect them. We don't have all the answers right now as to how to protect them, but we are putting in place investments as to how to do that and how to plan for that. And you have more details on that coming in Climate Ready Boston. So if we step back for a moment and think about these three big places where we can grow and enhance our neighborhoods, our commercial cores, and our edge areas, the next question is sort of what kinds of other places in our city really become the center point of our city going forward? And what we turn to is the waterfront. The waterfront has always been sort of a core central component of who we are as a city. Boston was founded on the Shawmut Peninsula, and our economic hubs have always been on the waterfront, and they continue to be there. So looking forward, what kind of waterfront can we have? We want to think about investments in open space in the public realm. We want to think about supporting our existing and emerging job and housing centers, about proactive climate planning. So I'll tell you a little bit about each. Here on the waterfront, many ways we know that economic mobility and connecting to the water are very closely tied. We want to think about not only providing access to the waterfront for people who live and work there, but from all neighborhoods of the city of Boston. We want to think about connecting all of our open spaces and our public realm along the waterfront. So here we have a map of our existing and emerging job centers and our housing centers. What you can see is that almost all of these are very proximate to water. And so this is a core component of how we think about our waterfront, really as this place of productivity. And given that, we also want to make sure that we are doing proactive climate protections. This is a flood map from about 2070s or later, given a projected modeling about 3 feet of sea level rise. And so we think that by getting out in front of that, we can actually do a lot of this work in advance. And these three areas are things that really work well together. As you think about our green spaces and open spaces and our proactive climate planning, those can become synergistic as we also think about them with our job centers. So we've talked about neighborhoods, job cores, edge areas, and our waterfront. This other very striking thing happens when you look at Boston. So if you look across almost any measure of well-being, certain areas of the city of Boston have greater disparity, are not doing as well on our sort of metrics of well-being. And so if you look at these maps for a moment, I challenge you to look and see what are the common threads across these. There are neighborhoods here that we think have not done as well, in part because there are structural things that are tricky. So for example, there's this choke point that, I don't have a pointer here, but you can sort of see this choke point right under Fort Point Channel that cuts off some of our neighborhoods from some of our growing economic assets. There's also difficult transportation connecting to our core job centers, and those reinforced by both historic city policies and market dynamics have meant that these areas, I'm getting a signal that I should be louder, can you hear me? That these are areas that have maps like this. What if we managed to address those core underlying components? Would these maps look different? So that's what we'll step through right now. We think that we can generate networks of opportunity, especially in these areas, by targeted investment. Investment in strengthening the connections between our neighborhoods and our job centers, investments in open space, culture, and the public realm, and having targeted economic mobility and anti-displacement policies. So here you see a bunch of circles that are in a ring. This is our jobs ring. And we're talking about connecting the Fairmount corridor area better to these jobs overall. Second thing we're talking about is truly investing in our open space, our culture, and public realm in these areas. So what you see here is what a completion of the Emerald Necklace would look like, which really is a fulfillment of a vision of over 100 years and also provides multiple benefits of green and active transportation and the ability to connect to much broader green spaces overall. Also the ability to invest in Franklin Park as this sort of central park in our city and the geographic heart of the city. And this provides the ability for our residents to truly take advantage of the assets that we have. And then because we want these kinds of investments really to benefit our communities that exist and benefit future residents, we know that we need to invest in anti-displacement efforts and also in economic mobility initiatives so that our residents of the future are able to truly take these investments and make sure that they become part of their lives. We don't have this dynamic happening anywhere else in the city. So one thing that I hope you notice here is that these types of initiatives require the integration of initiatives across a wide range of different topic areas. And these initiatives actually came from our residents. Our residents suggested almost every initiative you'll see in the Imagine Boston plan, and they not only suggested them, but then they wrote long sort of thoughts about how they could be better, and they rated them on the sort of Amazon scale of 1 through 5 stars. So that's part of what you see here. And then finally, in order to implement these, we're going to need to make changes to how we plan, how we collaborate, how we fund, and how we measure. And this plan of Imagine Boston really rolls up a whole bunch of initiatives that are being laid out in a great deal more detail through topical plans. That's everything from our resilience and racial equity initiatives, Go Boston 2030, which is the transportation plan, and Climate Ready Boston. So what I'll do here is I'll pause for a moment, since I've said a lot of things, and take a few questions here, and then I think the mayor will come in and also provide some thoughts. Anyone have any questions?
Great. Well, I'm Catherine Carlock with the BBJ. Is there any sense of how practically this would be carried out. I mean, when we talk about integration of different plans, just how each of these plans are going to work together. I mean, how practically would that actually work, and how would the BPDA come into that?
Yeah, so I can talk about some integration. Sure. So one of the things that we've done is we've...
Step back to the mic, please.
Absolutely. How's this? Better. Okay. So your question was around how do all these plans integrate practically. So we've done a whole range of different things. We've mapped out all the sort of potential initiative areas and how they might interact with each other, whether that's on a geographic basis in different areas of the city. In terms of the timelines of implementation, some elements you might think that if you're able to time them together, you're actually able to capture more benefits. So a great example of that is as we think about some of our climate planning on a district scale and our areas in which we might grow, being able to bake those in from the beginning is incredibly helpful. And then we've also thought a lot about sort of how this works in terms of making sure that all of the different components of initiatives are pulling in the same direction in order to achieve the 5 goals that happened overall. So we're thinking about it overall in a 5-year, 15-year, and beyond time horizon. In the next iteration of the document, you'll see more sort of specifics on some of the implementation components there.
And just to speak specifically to how you'll see this integrate with some of the other planning work that's being done at the BPDA, the work that we're doing right now that we've started to see the rollout with the SPAs is a different approach to planning that really mirrors what we're trying to do with Imagine Boston 2030, and that we're bringing all of the resources across departments together in a different way and cross collaboration. So with the plans that we have ongoing with Plan Dorchester Avenue, Plan JP Rocks, Plan Dudley Square, we have interdepartmental working groups where we're bringing across disciplines all of those resources so that we can address the concerns and challenges that communities are facing across all of our policy domains. So I think that in the most practical sense, you'll start to see the implementation in those concrete specific planning areas where we're able to bring all of these different initiatives and policies together to address the full range of issues. You can also see that in those draft plans that are available right now for Plan Dorchester Avenue and Plan JP Rocks, where you have implementation charts that show where different departments will be taking the lead on different initiatives that were raised during the planning process. So I'm Sarah Meyerson. I'm the Director of Planning at the BPDA.
Tim Logan with the Globe. I'm really interested in the idea of more development in sort of the edges of the city, like you said, whether it's Suffolk Downs or Reedville. How do you, the one sort of in the middle, like the 100-acre plan I get, but like how do you get, as practical matter, sort of, how do you attract development to those corners of the city that frankly are kind of hard to get to, and there's a reason why they haven't developed as much. How does that work?
Interestingly, many of the expanded areas that Rebecca showed during the presentation are also in close proximity to transit. So while Suffolk Downs or Reedville feel like they're far away, they also are well positioned in close proximity to our existing infrastructure. So they're areas where as you build out that infrastructure and continue to invest in it, you'll have robust connections back all across the city. That was one of the key components that was important in thinking about where and how we grow in the future. So while they may seem far removed now, they also are well located and in close proximity if you think about overall long-term the Blue Line or the Fairmont Corridor.
So a lot of this hinges on infrastructure, said. Where does that money for that come from?
So I think that clearly there's a component of this that is advocacy of continuing to invest in our infrastructure, both with city dollars as well as searching for other funds that are available, whether they be from the state or from our federal funds. Clearly we need to be creative, innovative in how we think about funding, and I know that that's something that Rebecca and Chief Sweeney have also been thinking about as they've been approaching this, thinking about how we can have alternative financing structures, how we can think about value share with private development, all things that others here can speak more eloquently to as well.
Do you see asking the business community or some private investment to fund some of those infrastructure improvements as well?
I think that those are all things that we could start to explore, and I think that we're going to have to be as creative as possible thinking about all of the different funding structures, and certainly private investment is one of those areas.
Good job, Sarah.
There's lots of other people here who can answer questions as well. So.
Can
You mentioned that there was quite a public process in getting these suggestions, that 12,000 residents contributed all of these ideas. So moving forward, how will the public be able to track and see how the ideas that they suggested actually turn into reality?
This is a very interesting way to do panels since we're right here. So a whole range of different components. So one thing that I want to make sure that I note here is that we're in a draft plan phase. So actually what we're trying to do is solicit more comments from our residents about how they feel about the initiatives we put out. So as part of that, we're going to have walks throughout the city, for example, walking the route of the completion of the Emerald Necklace or a ferry tour with our chiefs so that our residents can talk directly to our chiefs about what it is that they want to see. That's in the near term. Over the longer term, we've got a whole range of forward-looking metrics that can help us track whether or not our initiatives are actually getting us closer to the goals that our residents helped set for us overall. And one of the things that we're committed to is thinking about pilots so that we're not just implementing and then seeing the metric over the long term, but we're actually sort of testing, learning, and iterating over time. So maybe what we'll do is we'll take a pause in the questions for a moment for comments from the mayor and then return.
I didn't realize I was walking into such a formal setup, so this is just for the press, by the way, so you can see that we're serious about this. Now, I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank Rebecca and Sarah who started this process. Thank you, Rebecca, for taking this over, and all the different folks that had something to do with putting this draft plan together. Most importantly, I want to thank over 12,000, and I apologize if any of it was already said, 12,000 people who actually submitted their views, their ideas. One of the best convenings we had, I thought, was at the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, where we had little kids writing on Post-its, sticking on the wall what they wanted to see of Boston. And it was really an incredible experience because a lot of things they said was good schools, safe streets, jobs, things like that. And when you think about our future, you think about the young children, their insight sometimes is as good as anybody's insight into this. So this truly was great. Together we set a goal. We've identified actions we need to take in reaching these goals, particularly with more affordable housing and public transportation, something that in some ways is within our means here in the city. But this Imagine Boston 2030 plan really isn't just about us as a city. It's about the whole area, what we can do collectively together. Boston's at a unique point in our history. Our population is growing. In the past 5 years, we've grown 2 times faster than the rest of the nation, and I think that's something to be said for what's happening in our city. We have a productive economy according to the studies, and I was excited to read this. Boston's workers are a third more productive than the national average, and certainly we can use that stat, but that strength as far as moving our city forward and being proactive on how we move forward as a city. We can also ensure that our growth is inclusive, that our neighborhoods remain affordable, and that we're prepared for climate change. And I think that this morning I didn't sign a compact, we announced a compact with the regional mayors talking about climate change and talking about the trend of what's happening now on a national level in politics, but how do we address that in the next 4 years? But what this plan does, it really looks into the future and how do we address it in the future in the city of Boston. This is what the plan does. It's a draft. I want to highlight the word draft, just so we're clear to all the press. I know that we cover everything great, and I want to thank you for that. This is a living document. It's not complete. We're going to be talking about it. We're going to be taking ideas and concerns and suggestions from residents. We're also going to, every step along the way, we're going to be continue to take this input in and be guided by what people in Boston say. When we launched this plan, I said it wasn't Marty Walsh's plan. It wasn't Sarah Myers' plan at the time, or Rebecca Emanuel's plan, or John Barrow's plan, or Joe Finn's plan. This is the city of Boston's plan. It's about what we want to see in our city in the future. It's something that's important for us. And that's why it's important to have complete community support, and not support, but involvement in this. Eventually support will be nice, but involvement in this plan as we move forward. I invite everyone to explore the plan. There's certainly a lot to read here. I actually, not to be written or printed, but I invite the press too to look at the plan and to say what you think is missing in the plan if there's something there, because this isn't just our city, it's your city as well. So please, you can write about whatever you want about, but make sure you input your plan. The key areas that I think that are identified in this plan are enhancing the vitality of our neighborhoods. You can take that comment and go many different ways with it. Encouraging mixed-use job centers throughout the city of Boston. Providing spaces for new housing and new jobs. Helping to create a sustainable waterfront for future generations. Think about all those different themes that we're working on here. This gives us a roadmap how to connect historically to underserved neighborhoods to opportunities. And in 2030, some of those underserved neighborhoods could look very different. So as we took the plans of each of the individual plans that we're doing, we wrap it into one big plan. We're also looking at the future of those communities. And how do those communities in some ways change for the better, but don't lose their identity today as who they are. We also want to make sure that this plan will help us create an anti-displacement package to help people in their houses. Something that we're struggling with every single day about how do we keep folks to be able to live in their homes and their neighborhoods. We want to make sure the benefits of Boston's growth and successes are felt by everyone, not by a few. Some of the things that I've heard over my entire time in public life, but also about how do we truly grow as an equitable city across for everyone. I'm proud of the hard work that went into this plan. It covers many different areas, from housing to parks, to open space, to climate change, to arts and culture, to so much more, things that people have been working on for a long time. Imagine Boston is certainly a truly group effort, evident by all of the folks that are in this room today and many people that we couldn't get in the room or we wouldn't have enough room for everyone else. We have many cabinet chiefs that are going to talk about their work. If they haven't already talked about their work, they're going to talk about their work. But I truly want to thank all the work that went into this plan. This is a comprehensive plan. Last time Boston did a plan was in the 1950s. The result of that plan was a thriving city. The result of that plan was a skyline that many of us saw today. If you live outside the heart of the city as you're driving in on the highway or coming in on the train, and you looked at the skyline, that came out of the plan in 1950. It's unlimited ability what might come out of this plan in 2030. This city is going to be very different as we move forward, and we want to make sure as we grow, as we change and grow for everyone. So with that, I'll take a few questions if anyone has questions for me. Yes.
Some of your major outlines there, enhancing the neighborhoods, expanding the core, it says encourage development is a big part of it. So are you worried about overdevelopment in the city?
No. I mean, I think we have to look at, the plan also talks about looking at how do we decide where areas are. One of those overdevelopments are, we talked about growth zones, and we launched growth zones in response to that. We also had a conversation about why that circle. We have to identify other places in the city where we can possibly grow and expand. We're 47 square miles as a city. There are certain areas we can't grow on, and we're also looking at where can that growth be in the future. Yeah.
How do we talk about overdevelopment, but how do we continue to develop and grow as a city while simultaneously protecting the national park system that runs through the city? I know that there's sort of, much of it is sort of state managed, so there's kind of an issue of, whose job is it really to protect the parks? So if you could just speak to that at all.
Well, I mean, as far as parks, the city, we have our own park system. We certainly work collaboratively with the National Park System. We work collaboratively with the Department of Recreation and Conservation. As a matter of fact, in the last 3 years, I believe we've created more open space than we had 3 years ago, and we're looking at other areas. I think we pride ourselves on 97% of the Bostonians are within a 10-minute walk of a park. We want to enhance that number, so I'm not concerned about, as we grow, taking over parkland. I don't think it's certainly not my intention or any mayor, I think, that will stand in this position, whether past or future, would ever consider using park space for development. In order to be a thriving, healthy city, a component of this is also the environment, climate change, and we have to enhance open green space if we can at all.
Mayor, in terms of growth, the improvement of neighborhoods oftentimes can really lead to gentrification. You talked about displacement efforts. Can you speak a little bit more about, what can be done to keep this city actually affordable for people to live here, that it's not just going to become a place where only the wealthiest can afford to live?
Great question. In the long term, obviously the plan looks at that and talks about that, and hopefully we'll address that. In the short term, one of the reasons why we launched a housing plan in October of 2014 was not to create high-end housing. We do a pretty good job of doing that ourselves. We don't need a roadmap to build high-end luxury housing. What we do need is a roadmap to build workforce low-income housing in the city of Boston. And it's important for us that for every unit of low-income, moderate-income housing that we build in the city of Boston, that's another opportunity for people to stay here and grow in our city. God bless you. In the last 18 months, two significant things have happened. We've changed the inclusionary development to 18%, which gives us more money to be able to do more around affordable housing. And last Tuesday, the voters of Boston overwhelmingly supported the Community Preservation Act, which allows us to get at least up to $16 to $20 million a year for affordable housing, open space, and historic preservation. And to go back to the question right before you, with the national park system, the CPA can help us with some of the historic landmarks we have in the city so they don't become in jeopardy of being torn down and something new built there. So we've done some we've done some really good things in the short term, but also in this plan looking long term, how do we keep neighborhoods stabilized? You know?
You guys know this, but I mean, is the pace at which people are being displaced being matched by your efforts? I mean, are you able to increase inclusionary development?
I'm not sure if we can tell that at this moment, but I do know that reports that I've read from Sheila, and Sheila can probably address it better than I do, it seems so we have stabilized rents to some degree and have stopped seeing those large spikes in rents and have started to stabilize the market. That's something that's important for us to do, because I think people are being displaced because they can't afford the rent or the mortgage. And we're trying to, in some of the actions we've taken a year ago, the first year we wouldn't see much of a benefit. I would expect in 2017 we'll see a real benefit from the increase of production on the market, because now we've had 2-3 years to actually build and have out in the street.
Mayor, have you put a price tag on any of these initiatives? How much will it cost taxpayers to get some of these things?
I don't look at it as costing taxpayers. I think some of it is through development. Some of it is over an extended period of time. I don't think you can necessarily put a price tag on something and say this plan is going to cost X amount of billions of dollars. I think that there's a lot of partnerships we have, certainly with the federal government, when it comes to some of the protections we need for storm surges and rising sea tide. When it looks to housing and innovation, things like that, I mean, obviously the federal government is not as involved in housing as I'd like it to be. So I think you can't put per se a price tag on it today. And some of this is a plan over many years, and this is a plan on into the future. So you can't put what a price tag today would be put on it would be completely different in 2030, 2040, 2050. Tim?
It's going to hinge on infrastructure investment, right? Whether you're talking about roads or the MBTA or stormwater defenses. Where are we going to find money for that?
We need to do it now. I mean, we need to do it now. It's like this isn't something new. This is something that, I think that what played out in the presidential election, to take a little bit away from this, is that people are angry that Congress and Senate weren't able to act. I mean, we have a major infrastructure problem in the United States of America right now, never mind 2030. And I think that unless we make some investments, if we want to stay up to par and be competitive on a global scale, if we want to be competitive on a national scale, we better start investing in our infrastructure. And I think that what we've done in the city is through this is come up with a plan in Go Boston 2030, a plan on not just transportation, but how do we deliver services. And some of that is going to take infrastructure money. Some of that's going to take changes in the way we travel. And I think that, this, whether or not we do the plan for infrastructure, that has to happen. And I'm hoping that this is something that might accelerate that understanding that we have to start to take this seriously. In the city of Boston, I mean, as you all know, we've had to close 2 bridges in 3 years. And there's a couple other bridges that are in tough shape right now that we have investments going on. I mean, we're talking decades of neglect that we didn't upgrade these facilities. We can't have bridges being closed in the city of Boston. So it's something that this plan takes it very seriously as far as transportation forward.
Related to that, how is the team planning to prioritize different areas of investment? Historically speaking, you might see a center-out policy where downtown improvements happen first, but then if you're talking about someone way on the southern end of the Fairmount line, they have more limited access to the city in the first place. So if you're talking about pilot programs, as Rebecca mentioned, how is the determination being made on where those are?
Again, I think that the plan is going to lay out what a vision would be for the city, but I think one of the moves we made about a month ago was the Boston Planning and Development Agency. You know, in 1950, when the master plan came out, the BRA came to fruition right after that, and it was about development. That plan in 1950, the 50s, was really about design and planning, not planning, design and construction and growth of a city. We're talking about planning and development of a city. So for every building that might be suggested in the city of Boston, we have to come up with a planning mechanism for around that. So it's about tying all these different pieces in together. So I think that the Boston Planning and Development Agency is doing some of that now. Our Transportation Department's doing some of that now. Our Public Works Department's doing some of that now. So we're doing that. What this Imagine Boston 2030 plan shows is a long-term, you know, I guess I'll say wish list, a long-term hope for where we are as a city.
When we look at the sort of outside the urban core, is there maybe a thought process on how to incentivize developers to go out there and to make those investments to build outside of where it might be easier?
Well, again, you mean outside of, you mean the heart of the city and going to the neighborhoods. You know, again, I think that's happening today, and you're going to see in this plan is how do we grow a community, but how do we preserve a community at the same time? How do we preserve its character, and how do we allow not to have so much gentrification and displacement of folks? I think that, and John can talk about this as well, we're seeing a lot of interest in neighborhoods where they weren't before. I'll give you one example. I grew up in St. Margaret's Parish, next to Savin Hill, on Dorchester Avenue, dot block. It was a cinder block building. Now we have a $160 million development proposed for there. That, if you told me 5 years ago there's going to be a $160 million development proposed for that part of Dort Ave, I'd say no way, because it'd be too complicated to pull it together. We're starting to see that happening. In the Dudley area, we have 2 or 3 or 4 different proposals looking to move forward in the Dudley area. We have a couple, I'm not going to get too much into it, but we have some proposals in the Dudley area. In Mattapan, we have proposals in the Mattapan area. Our licensing board the other day gave a few liquor licenses to Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan. More than that, it was like the first time in a while we actually started to see that much excitement and involvement in the neighborhood. So we're starting to see that happen now. And what this plan really is about, how do we make sure we preserve those communities, because the character of Mattapan, the character of Roxbury, the character of Dorchester, the character of Hyde Park, that's what makes our city great. It has its own little identity. So we want to see it grow, but we also want to be able to try and keep that identity.
What about schools? I haven't heard anything or seen anything so far about new schools, improving schools.
If we're going to put a master plan for 2030 and talk about what kind of school system we want in 2030, in my opinion, we're cutting our kids very short. Right now, the master plan for the schools are happening right now. We're working on reinventing our high schools. We're working on making investments in our schools today. This is a master plan for the future of the city. We purposely didn't put our schools conversation doesn't happen in this. Our school conversation is happening right now. This is what we want to see the city look like in 20, 30 years from now. The schools need to be good today, and we're working on them right now, and they're not part of the master planning process. It has its own separate piece moving forward. We have master planning going on in the schools, but it's a separate document, if I said that correctly. Anything else?
With regard to the type of construction that's being encouraged, mixed-use developments seem to be popping up across the city. Is the city as a whole prioritizing mixed-use properties over single-use, purely residential, as we try and deal with the population expansion?
I think that's going to be one of the interesting things that comes out of the draft, going out in the community to see what the community says. I mean, I think there are certain neighborhoods that say they want mixed use. There are other neighborhoods that might want more residential housing and less mixed use. I think that's something that will be fleshed out over the course of the next several weeks and months to see what people feel about the plan. I think, again, it'll be very different in different neighborhoods. I mean, if you go to, I don't know, use Roxbury and West Roxbury, you know, there are parts of Roxbury and West Roxbury that people want to keep it residential and quiet and just the way it is, and there are parts of West Roxbury and Roxbury that people wouldn't mind mixed use, and I think it's going to be really by neighborhood how that's going to work.
When you guys are doing the transportation component of this, to what extent are you able to work with the team on what you need to the future?
I think this is going to be a roadmap for the T to see that, you know, we really need a strong system. I know the T is, you know, run by the state, obviously, and by the MBTA and the board and MassDOT board, and they're doing their thing. But this is a blueprint that we're going to be able to show the T, saying that in order for the city of Boston to live up to what the potential could be here, we need a strong, reliable, new public transportation system. And I think the T will look at it because, I mean, for the economy of the Commonwealth, they certainly need a thriving, healthy, innovative Boston to move the economy forward. Where roughly 20% of their intake as far as revenue, tax revenue, comes from the city of Boston. And that's only going to grow with the amount of companies that have moved into our city in the last year and a half, 2 years, and the number of companies that have reached out to us to come into our city. That income tax is going to only grow in the city, so it's going to be vitally important for the T to look at this plan and come up with a long-term plan that works in parallel with us.
Are there other cities that have anti-displacement policies in place that you look to as examples for how to formulate a Boston anti-displacement plan?
Do you want to? And when I leave here, this room, I'm going to have Ron Dorsey talk briefly about a little. I mean, there's education pieces in this, but I thought you were talking about the schools. I'll have Ron address some of that. Any other questions for me? Let me off the hook easy. Thank you very much. Listen, I have to run to another room, but I truly want to thank the team here, and as I said earlier at the very beginning, in particular the 12,000 people who took part in some type of charrette, forum, conversation, suggestion card, whatever it was they did. I want to thank them for that, because this truly is a great piece of work, and it's not a perfect piece of work yet. It will be perfect when it's done, because there's more input coming in. But again, I want to thank all of you, the press, for covering today. Thank you. Ron, do you want to just?
Good afternoon, everyone. You can say good afternoon. So a few things about education. The mayor said a lot of the work that we need to do is happening now. We certainly do have a 2030 vision, but I would say part of what we're trying to do right now through our 10-year education and facilities master plan, which is in part being co-led by Ben Viner, who is standing in the back here, is to figure out how we're going to modernize Boston public school system. So thinking about modernization from an infrastructure standpoint, from an equipment and tools and instructional approach standpoint as well. And so we are looking at roughly January, February for the release of a report on our education and facilities master plan, which will be a long-term guide for capital investment in our buildings. We also need to think, and I think especially in light of question 2, either way that it went, what is sustainable urban education going to look like in Boston? What is high quality urban education going to look like in Boston? It's a strength that there are many options for schools, and Boston will be a place that features many types of schools: district, charter, parochial, independent. The question is, how will that be financially sustainable for the city, and how can we make sure that there is quality behind every door that you walk through? And a lot of the work that we'll be doing in the coming years is figuring out how we collaborate on solving some very pernicious problems in education, whether it's related to supporting English language learning students, special education students, work we need to do across the board on school discipline. So we really want to think across segments of the education sector about how we do that. The third thing to think about is education should be seamless. When you enter a door in pre-K or in family care, you should be able to see clear through to higher education and career attachment. So that means lowering cost barriers on the back end. So the mayor's free tuition program, which Trinh Nguyen spearheaded for us, thinking about student supports as well, because it's not just the cost, it's making sure that wherever you are in your life, you can balance being a parent and being in school. You can have affordable housing and be in school. We want to make sure that from birth to career, we've got a seamless pipeline and that there are very few opportunity costs or real costs to you accessing quality education. Lastly, we want to make sure that whole community learning takes place in Boston. So beyond our schools, there are a myriad of learning opportunities. You think about our cultural institutions. Boston probably has the highest quality youth serving nonprofit sector in America, and I would dare any other city to say otherwise. We're talking about our higher ed institutions as well. So how do we make sure that from the earliest ages, young people are walking through all of those doors? We're actually able to give them credit for the learning that they do in and beyond school, and to really build a portfolio of experiences that get them ready to contribute to this city, be it in the economy or as civic leaders and citizens.
So just before we conclude, I wanted to just point out that there's a lot of boards in the back of the room, and basically if you took a tour of those boards, you would probably have the executive summary squarely in your head. There's another resource, since I know that many of you are working under a deadline. If you look at our website online, there's something called story maps, which will give you each of the key points next to the key maps or graphics of the Imagine Boston plan. And also, if you have more questions, feel free to come up afterwards. Thanks very much for being here.